Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Infinite Crossover. I am your host, DW, and sitting across from me from via Skype is my co host and partner in crime, the creator of CapersCrusader.org, Mr. Josh Epstein. How are you, sir?
I'm doing really well. I'm doing really well. I managed to make it into a physical comic shop for the first time in a few weeks yesterday because there was a great new book out from Image, COWL. I think Mike actually talked about that on yesterday's Inkcast.
Oh, yes, yes.
And it was so good. And they had trades out for the first volume of Manifest Destiny, which I nabbed, and I grabbed the first volume of Pretty Deadly.
Yeah, don't rub that cowl in my face because it's sold out and the depot didn't have any. And if you listened, I think you were listening yesterday live. I'm going to have to buy a digital copy.
I got the second to last copy, and my buyers, who also writes on Capeless, I ran into her there at Elite Comics, and she grabbed their last copy. So Elite Comics at 119th and Quivira is also sold out.
Nice. We went to go. I had asked Darren from the Comic Depot. Uh, Something's going on here.
Yeah, I lost you for a second.
Yeah, that's weird. We're gonna have to stop broadcast for a second. 1 second, please. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Infinite Crossover. I am your host, DW, and sitting across from me via Skype is Mr. Josh Epstein, the creator of CapersCrusader.org and my partner in crime. How are you, sir?
I am doing really, really well. I actually managed to get into a brick and mortar comic shop for the first time in probably about a month or so yesterday. I absolutely had to go and pick up a copy of COWL or Cowl from Kyle Higgins
Yeah,
with
whatever.
Image.
Whatever. I don't want to hear
I
it.
know, I know. I listened to yesterday's Inkcast, and Mike Sains was talking about it. I know you're bummed you couldn't get a copy.
And it was funny because I asked Darren to order another one, and he went into Diamond. They were already all sold out.
Yeah, I think that one is going to wind up being a huge hit, and would not surprise me at all if somewhere down the road that doesn't get looked at by somebody for being adapted into a TV show. The great sort of grimy 60s vibe. It reminded me, oh God, I'm trying to remember the title of the movie now. There's a great old cop movie with Gene Hackman that's set in that same sort of environment, and that's really what it reminded me of, the sort of really dirty look at the streets. The cops aren't, they're not the shiniest characters, or not, they're not cops, it's the unionized superheroes of Chicago. They're not the shiniest of characters, and everything is sort of starting to break down a little bit, and there are references to some really sleazy things in the past of the organization. So I'm really excited to see what that's like. I mean, I know Kyle Higgins is a Chicago native. He's the same guy who writes Nightwing, or who wrote Nightwing for a long time when he moved him to Chicago. And so I'm really excited. I mean, he obviously has a great grasp of the city's history and its feel. There's a map in the front of it with all the districts that Cal patrols in Chicago. I actually thought about sending a picture of it to my dad, who is living in Chicago now, being like, so I kind of want to figure out which superhero would have been patrolling your neighborhood when you were a kid. Can you let me know where you were?
Nice. Guys,
But that was awesome, and yeah, I also got to pick up the first volume of Manifest Destiny from Image and the first volume of Pretty Deadly. And I love Image trades, man. They're only $9.99.
how can they make money at such a low price?
Well, they're 5-issue trades instead of 6-issue trades like the big two do, and the way they release them, the schedule that they have, is perfect. It's always, as soon as the newest issue is on shelves, the trade collecting the last few issues is right there next to it.
Yeah, and I like that. I like that setup.
It really is great because it makes it possible. Because I mean, so many of these image books, like we talked about with Cal, they're sold out as soon as they're released. They're getting sold out, and they've got to go to second and third printings. And so I mean, it could be really difficult to go back and pick up old issues. But if the trade is right there when the new issue is on shelves, and it's only $10 for the cost of 2 or 3 new issues, you can pick up the trade of the old ones, and you can pick up the new ones. So you're spending, $15 for 6, 7 issues of comics.
Nice. No, I like that formula. Yeah, they're sold out. I'm gonna have to go on eBay and buy Cowl 1 for like $20.
It's gonna be. I think that one's gonna be a hit, dude. And you know me, I'm big into social issues and that's one of the major reasons I started Capeless. And the idea of dealing with labor rights from the the lens of superheroes just sounds so freaking cool to me.
Yeah, it does. It's going to be pretty cool. I'm excited to. I'll probably read it today digitally. Comixology. Guys, we're also tweeting live, so if you have any questions for us today, anything at all, or our topic as we get into our topic this week, I do want to put out a shout out to our staff over at FBI, capelesscrusader.org, as we are one. Guys doing some great stuff over there. Make sure you go check out fanboysinc.com. Logan, Mike Sains, Joshua, Muka, Tammy, all putting out some great stuff. Cody.
We've got like 4 Joshes on the site right now, which is crazy.
Sorry, Joshua, I can't remember your last name.
We got Josh Peach, we got Josh Lazarus, we got me.
That's it. It's Josh Lazarus.
It makes me feel like when I'm sending emails to the editors that I'm back in the military, where I'm like referring to everybody by last name, like tell Peach we need this,
Bear with me because Fanboys Inc. had a staff of 2, so now we're up to many more than that. But you guys are doing some great jobs over there. If you're listening, kudos to you guys. Keep it up. And if you're a listener and a fan, go over and check out fanboysinc.com. Some great articles over there, and much more to come as con season is rolling in. So.
And also, as we're pitching here, I mean, you should follow some of these folks on Twitter too. Like I know Muka, all the stuff he does for us on FBI and on Capeless is very comic book centric. But I mean, the dude is a huge movies fan. Period.
Oh, big time.
And he runs his own site where he cross posts a lot of the stuff that he does for FBI. Badlands 75, the Badlands is his site, and there he talks about like all sorts of other movies and TV stuff. So I mean, that's really cool. A lot of our folks work on their own sites as well, which is really cool. I know that Austin Gorton, who does Market Maven for us every week, which is one of my favorite pieces, by the way. I know you and I talk about that a lot. Like, I think he's doing some of the best analysis of comic market trends on the internet. He works with the League of Comic Geeks. And does some great stuff over there. No, it's Two Gentlemen of Leisure. That's it. Two Gentlemen of Leisure is his site, and the stuff that they post is just really fun. So I mean, we really do have some of the most knowledgeable and devoted fanboys in the business doing work for us, and that's what makes this a joy. And I always get really excited when I come on this podcast because it gives me a chance to pump those guys up a little bit, and they really are doing great work.
Oh, they are. I can't wait to see what more we get from them, especially with con season coming up. Oh well, we are in con season, and a lot of us are all over the place. So.
Oh yeah. I mean, I know that we just added like 2 more cons to our list today. I found out that Wizard World is going to be doing a show in February in my old hometown of Madison, Wisconsin. So
sure. After you leave, you get a big con.
Right. Seriously. I mean, I get to Kansas City just a little bit too late to hit Planet Comic Con. And then now Wizard World's going to have a show in Madison. Like, what is this, comics? Are you trying to avoid me?
It was like just flipping you the bird. See, Josh, you left. See what happened? See, that's why you shouldn't have left, too.
That's all right. I'm hoping I can get our old buddy Jay Gable to maybe go cover Wizard World Madison for us. And maybe Mike Stock will be willing to drive in from Milwaukee and do that, too.
Nice. Now, today's topic, we just went, this past weekend was Memorial Day weekend. I hope everybody had a safe and happy Memorial Day weekend. But also took the time to remember why we're having that weekend and how comics have affected or been affected by that particular military and so on. You want to give a little bit more detail on today's topic?
Absolutely. I mean, for the last probably month or so, I've been trying to do a regular series every couple of weeks called Comics and Nationalism over on capelesscrusader.org, where I'm looking at the history of how comics have represented nationalistic themes, which sort of has a lot to do with what we're talking about today. But really, what we wanted to discuss were ways that patriotism shows up in comics and how that has changed over the course of, basically mainstream comics have been around for going on 75 years. We really think about the origins of mainstream comics as being really dating back to about 1939. And from just a cultural zeitgeist perspective, I always find it really interesting that modern comics were born the year that Hitler invaded Poland.
Okay.
That there was this, I think, this sense in culture overall that something dark was coming. To steal a line from Game of Thrones, that winter really was coming, that the world had gone through a sustained period of peace after World War I. I mean, because major combat operations in World War I ended in 1915, and then it was almost 25 years between that and the start of World War II. So I mean, there were things going on here and there. There were smaller conflicts in Europe. There was the Spanish Revolution. There was, obviously the Nazis taking over Germany and the rise of fascism, the Russian Revolution. But there was this sense that order was beginning to break down, and that there was a great evil on the horizon. If you could sort of compare it to anything in fiction, it was that feeling that Gandalf has at the beginning of Lord of the Rings, where he can tell that a great evil is rising.
Right.
And I kind of have always felt that the rise of particularly superhero comics was kind of a response to that there were these great dark powers, over the eastern horizon that were coming to power, and that we needed something to fight them, that we needed something to show us light.
Well, Captain America is a prime example of that.
Captain America debuted in 1939, the same year that Superman and Batman did.
Hitler made a lot of covers on Captain America for a while.
Well, the very first cover of Captain America was him punching Hitler square in the jaw. And what was interesting was that was before the U.S. had even formally entered the war. I mean, most people who remember their high school history classes remember that the U.S. didn't officially enter World War II until the second week of December in 1941, after FDR's Day of Infamy. We had been sending equipment over to Europe. We had been doing Lend-Lease with Great Britain and selling them ships, selling them submarines. American pilots had been going over to basically volunteer their services with the Royal Air Force, but there wasn't any official American involvement in World War II until Pearl Harbor was attacked. But despite that, we still had stories in Captain America where he was actively fighting fascist spies that were trying to undermine the United States before we could enter the war. Batman even was dealing with some Nazi spies. Superman didn't get into it that much. I think that there may have been a little bit of fear on the part of his creators, because what a lot of people don't remember is that Siegel and Schuster were both Jewish Americans from Cleveland. So there was obviously an awareness on their part, more so than I think a lot of the rest of America in 1939, of what the fascist takeover of Europe really meant, particularly for Jewish people.
You think maybe the creators was a little too close to home?
I think that there was maybe a fear that they would be accused of trying to use Superman to gin up popular sentiment for war.
For propaganda.
There was, while Europe was far more extreme in its anti-Semitism at that time, there was a strong anti-Semitic trend in the United States. There was a, horrible famous incident just after Pearl Harbor in New York where some vandals took just the right light bulbs out of the glowing sign over the newspaper, the Jewish Daily Forward. They removed certain lights to where instead of Jewish Daily Forward, it said Jew is for war.
Oh, boy. Okay.
It was the idea that, for people, anti-Semitic Americans, it was this idea that the war in Europe was none of our business, and that it was only the Jews in America that were trying to drag us into this war.
Okay.
So I think that Siegel and Schuster were probably very conscious of that, which is why we saw Superman largely avoid that. But even then,
he showed really positive support. We've seen covers. I mean, I put up a cover with him walking hand in hand with two different branches of the military. It seemed
right. Once the war launched, it was game on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then, if you were part of American pop culture, you were stumping for the war effort. We saw lots of ads during that time period of Superman, Batman talking about victory gardens, talking about doing your part, talking about buying war bonds. What's interesting is the stories themselves took two very different approaches between DC and what was National Comics, which eventually became DC, and Timely Comics, which is what eventually became Marvel. Timely was very, very directly active in the war. Those were the stories where we saw the invaders who were, fighting on the front lines in Europe. We saw Captain America, obviously, fighting on the front lines in Europe. They were superheroes at war. National Comics, on the other hand, went with much more of an escapist theme. The covers tended to be very pro-American, pro-war effort. We saw, whole covers devoted to buying war bonds. But once you flipped open the comic, the story would have nothing to do with what was going on in the war. And what's interesting is that in many ways, those were the comics that soldiers on the front lines gravitated to. Captain America sold great at home.
Right. I can see that.
Because people wanted heroic stories of our boys at war. Captain America, Nick Fury, and the Howling Commandos. Those were for us here at home to say our men abroad are heroes.
It's kind of like a fictional news of seeing what's going on over on the front lines while we're here at home going, oh my God, this is what maybe feeling that this is what's going on the front lines over there. And
exactly.
The guys on the front lines want to know what's going on at home or having some escapism.
Exactly, and you and I have gotten into it once or twice on this podcast talking about the value of escapism.
Mm-hmm.
But in that context in particular, I think that there is an extremely strong value to that.
I agree.
That the National Comics served a real purpose in giving those, because there was no TV. Those soldiers, weren't sitting there like soldiers today are. They can take portable DVD players out with them. They've got videos on their iPod. They can listen to music from home, this, that, and the other. These were guys who comic books were really their link to American pop culture. It was a slice of normal life delivered to them on the front lines. So they didn't want to read stories about what they were seeing every day.
Now, wait a minute. How did they get these books, Josh?
They were usually delivered by the American Red Cross, the same, and USO. Pardon me. The same people who, say, organize shows with Bob Hope and the kind of things you see in the first Captain America movie where they bring over entertainment.
You know what I find?
They would send care packages to soldiers abroad.
Yes. What I find funny, because back then they were, really funny books, but there seemed to be a strong effort to put those funny books on the front line. And I think that's kind of neat to see that, when you say you were working in comics, you're scoffed at, but they're just funny books for kids, but we're making an effort to bring those books over to the soldiers on the front line.
Exactly. I mean, they were a lifeline for those guys. It was a way of, you could flip open a Superman comic, and it was the same experience, sort of, as sitting on your corner stoop in Manhattan and reading that.
Right.
You didn't see guys getting blown up. You didn't see, all of your friends getting killed on a daily basis.
Right.
You saw the same kind of stories that you saw when you were buying that on the newsstand at home. And if you had kids at home, you knew that these were the same stories that they were reading. It gave you a connection to them that you otherwise wouldn't have had.
Now, basically, since we started this podcast, Infinite Crossover, talking about the serious issues and how writers interject maybe their political views or their stance, I would assume it's safe to say that Marvel was doing that while DC was not, or Timely and National, where maybe the writers were really, it was a fantasy story, obviously, with Captain America on the front line, but there was definitely an underlying message within these books.
I think there's something to that, but the thing to remember is that World War II in particular is one of those rare instances in American history when there really were no politics. To a large extent. I mean, there were still problems. There were still things that they were dealing with in Washington.
Yep.
But if you look back at the history of that time, it was the nation had a problem, and everybody was expected to fix it. There was no tolerance for getting in the way or for obstructing. Harry Truman, for instance, made his bones as a politician on the national level by going after people that were trying to profit from the war by delivering substandard equipment. That was, Give 'Em Hell Harry was a result of him holding these huge series of congressional hearings that were broadcast on the radio, where he was going after manufacturers like Boeing and Lockheed Martin and saying, you're behind on your contracts. You were paid for this and we didn't get this equipment, or you delivered this equipment and it wasn't what we needed. Those were the political battles of the time, not we need money for this. Well, we don't want to let you have money for that because it's going to make you look good in the next election. There was none of that. When FDR came to the Congress in 1939 and started looking at what was going on in Europe, he knew, and there was an understanding even among people that were resistant to entering the war, that it was going to happen. We were going to wind up fighting, and we needed to get ready to fight. That's why all of a sudden you saw all these massive infrastructure projects. You saw us putting people back to work in factories, even when there wasn't necessarily work for them to do, because we knew that very soon we were going to need experienced factory workers who could start building tanks and planes. And the train tracks needed to be laid to get things from here to there when the war actually started. I'm a bit of a history junkie, and that was how Eisenhower got to be who he was. His whole thing before the war was he was the guy they put in charge of making us ready. And then once the war started, they said, okay, you're the guy who got us ready, now go fight the war.
Right. No, I agree with you. Now, even some of our creators were even in the war effort. I mean, Stan Lee.
Well, some of our creators were in the war effort, and
wasn't Kirby as well?
Kirby, most of them fought.
Yeah.
Most of them fought, or at least volunteered.
Yeah.
A lot of them, obviously, there was a stereotype of nerds even then that, we were kind of scrawny, weakly dudes. And, a lot of those guys wound up being Steve Rogers, not Captain America.
Yeah, exactly.
So they were doing their part at home to promote the war effort in the way they could.
Yeah.
They were raising awareness. They were trying to make sure that people donated to war bonds. They were trying to make sure that people did their part for all the resource gathering initiatives, and that they did what they could, to support the guys at home. Buy a comic on the newsstand, then donate it to the USO so it can be sent to a troop abroad.
But now, as we move forward through time and into the present time, we see a lot of political issues through books. Not so much more military endorsements or in favor or against, really. It seems now, like you said, there wasn't really politics back then. Now there seems to be more politics and more of a judgment on where you stand.
I think that's true, but I wanna back us up for a second, because the World War II era, like I said, was kind of unique, where the nation was united against a common enemy.
Right.
Coming out of that, things changed a lot in the next probably couple of decades. We did see a lot more characters who had been part of the war. There was an effort to show that these characters did their part. One of the characters I mentioned in my Comics and Nationalism series was the Guardian. He was an able-bodied man, who you could easily see having needed to be on the front lines, but was still serving as a police officer.
Okay.
What they did with him was they showed that, much like what actually happened when most of the police officers signed up and went overseas, there was we started to see more of a problem with organized crime. So the Guardian was the guy dealing with that here at home. As we moved out of World War II, though, what we started to see was a change in the idea of nationalism. The Red Scare began pretty much immediately after World War II. Once the Nazis were defeated, there was this idea that we needed another common enemy, and the easiest target, of course, was the communists. Russia was the other superpower in the world. Patton had wanted to start a war with them right off the bat as soon as World War II was over, and we kind of thought that was a bad idea. But that wound up being written into comics as time went on. When World War II ended, most of the superhero comics went away with it, which I've always found really interesting. That once the bad guy in the real world was defeated, we didn't seem to see as much of a need for superpowered good guys to fight superpowered bad guys.
See, I would have thought maybe, Josh, that after the war was over, we would have seen more escapism comics, a more lighter stories.
We did, but what was interesting was they didn't really feature superheroes.
Okay.
The 50s saw the rise of a lot of war comics, basically things for kids to read that resonated with the experiences that their parents had had, or guys who sort of wanted to put a sheen of fiction on what they had experienced.
Like
I know that there
Fury.
were Sergeant Fury, Sergeant Rock, The Unknown Soldier. They were comics that honored what had happened and really helped build the sense of the World War II veterans as what Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation. That we saw these stories of what they did. We saw those characters became the most prominent characters, along with a rise in Western comics and romance comics. And we saw a lot more science fiction than street-level action.
Okay.
Really, the post-war era was kind of between what we would think of as the golden age and the silver age of superhero comics. Pretty much the only superhero comics that survived the Great Purge after World War II were Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. Green Lantern got canceled. The Flash got canceled. Captain America went off the shelves.
Went off the shelves for a while. I do remember that.
And didn't come back until 1963 when they brought him back as a part of the Avengers.
Right, and then when it was from Timely to Marvel.
Mm-hmm. And so, comics became less a part or superhero comics became less a part of patriotism than the idea of the American dream became what they were talking about in comics. We saw lots of romance comics that dealt with building that ideal of what we saw in the 50s of, man falls in love with woman, marries woman who winds up, in the kitchen, at the house with the chicken in the pot and the 2 cars in the garage. That became a big theme in comics. We saw a lot of the spy stuff. The people that were, defending, it wasn't these outward enemies, but, sort of subversive enemies. When they eventually did bring the Justice Society back, and that didn't happen until the late 50s in All-Star Comics, they explained why they went away. And it was due to the Red Scare. That, for those of you who don't know your history about that, Joseph McCarthy, the junior senator from Wisconsin, decided that he was going to go on basically a witch hunt, looking for communists everywhere. He said, I have a list of communists and who are in the U.S. Congress, and I know who they all are. He never produced that list, but it produced this idea that communists were everywhere, that anybody who was hiding anything was probably a communist. And so they wound up explaining that the Justice Society of America was called in front of what was the House Un-American Activities Committee and said, you need to reveal your identities to us so that we know you don't have anything to hide, or you need to go away. And they said, well, we're superheroes. We can't be revealing our identities or our families are in danger, so we're going to have to go away.
The first Superhero Registration Act.
It was. It really was. I mean, it predated Marvel by 50 years.
Yeah, definitely.
But there wasn't a conflict in the superheroes. It wasn't, some of them saying, I want to keep doing this, and others saying, okay, I quit. Right. It was basically all of them saying, you know what? We're not going to put what we want ahead of the needs of the country. The country doesn't want our services because we're too secretive. We're going to retire. Right, we're done. Right.
Well, I think
that, and in a way, that was very nationalist of them.
I was going to say, it's a sign of the times right there.
Yeah, he was saying that if you want something that is contradictory to the needs of the country as expressed by Congress, then you're going to put the needs of the country ahead of your own.
Yep. Right.
And in a way, that's very patriotic of the Justice Society, that they weren't going to oppose the U.S. government, that they were willing to hang it up because the U.S. government didn't want them.
And going along with the sign of the times, also it shows, and we've talked about this topic before with Capes and Cowls, the actual superheroes. It was a very black and white line between what makes a superhero and what doesn't. Now the line has been blurred as we get closer and closer to present day of are you really a superhero? What are your motivations? Back then it was pretty cut and dry.
Well, and the real time that started to begin, and this is moving us forward in time a little bit, was around Vietnam. Around the time of Vietnam is when we started to see the idea of questioning your government really reemerge as a part of American patriotism. That there was a divide in America as opposed to that attitude that the Justice Society had, which was you do what the government says is right for America and you don't question it, versus a young generation of people who were coming out of universities saying,
rebelling.
We want to question what the government says is right for us. Right. We want to question whether or not this war we're being sold is right. And we started to see that reflected in the comics of the time. This was after the Marvel Revolution had begun, and the core readership of the Marvel Revolution was really that young group of people. It was, starting in 1963, which was, yes, a little bit before when we got involved in Vietnam. Oh, no, we were already involved in Vietnam by 63, but you were seeing that questioning starting to rise. It was the rise of the rebel youth. And what really sold it for me was when you saw Captain America openly questioning the government. Mm-hmm. You saw Captain America opposing, and they never named him President Nixon in the book, but you saw him opposing a character who basically was President Nixon.
Yes, that's a very popular cover too, I believe.
It is. And what wound up happening is they basically told Captain America, you need to get in line, and Captain America said, no, I'm not going to get in line. I'm going to quit and do my own thing.
Now, do you think that was from the writer's personal viewpoints?
I think that there obviously had to be. I mean, you don't write that story if you don't believe in it as a writer. Right. But I think that they were looking at who it was that buys their comics and what the young people of those days were concerned about. And they said, if we want Captain America to represent our readership, the America of our readership, then he needs to take a stand against what he sees as the unjust actions of the U.S. government. And in a way, it was hearkening back to a very founding principle of the United States in terms of what made patriots. It was this idea that it's our right passed down to us by the founders of this country to question our government. I mean, it's built right into the Constitution. Yep. The right to petition your government for redress of grievances. That the citizen's opinion does not need to be subsumed based on the needs of the government. That the government is supposed to serve the people, not the other way around. And in a way, it was kind of rebelling against what JFK said. JFK, who is considered to be this great liberal hero of the 1960s, said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Captain America was asking, what is my country asking me to do, and is that something that I am okay with doing as an individual citizen?
And that's always been an ongoing issue throughout the years with Captain America in different time periods, obviously.
Well, and I think that kind of defined what we think of as the modern attitude of Captain America. He believes in those founding principles of America, which in a strange way is kind of libertarian. It's not progressive, it's not conservative, it's very much libertarian in that the government should not tell him what to do, but when there's a problem, we should all get behind it and deal with it.
So it's kind of his attitude of pre and during World War II America and government, and then afterwards it's totally changed.
Yes, that Captain America, yeah, exactly. Captain America says, when there's a common enemy, we all need to put our personal nonsense aside, saddle up, and deal with it.
Right.
But when there's not a common enemy, it's the responsibility of every patriotic American to stand up for individual rights. And I think that's a very powerful message on his part. It says when we have to deal with something, we get together and deal with it. But when we don't, it's our freedom and our responsibility to argue it out and hash it out. Because that ability to do that, sort of like you and I do on this podcast, where we disagree on things, yep. But then we argue it over and we fight about it amongst ourselves until we come to a common consensus.
Agreed. I totally agree. Now, to shift from the patriotic side in a way, 1963, the emergence of the X-Men, young teens coming out, rebelling, are mutants, are segregated. Do you feel that the real life movement was a deciding factor in making
that's without question. That's okay. Without question. Even Stan Lee will talk about how in the past, Professor X and Magneto were created as counterparts.
Yes.
To Martin Luther King and Malcolm X.
Correct.
It was this idea of violent resistance, which was the Black Panther movement, resistance through force, versus integration and becoming a part of the culture.
So the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants were the Black Panthers?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
It was looking for supremacy as opposed to coexistence.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we told our listeners that, because that's been a couple of our DYKs that we've had over on our Facebook page. And
what I found interesting, and this is minor spoilers for Days of Future Past, is that they sort of touched on that very, very briefly in Days of Future Past. There's a scene where you see several mutants, some of whom you recognize and some of whom you have to do some research before you recognize, who are serving as a part of a special unit with the U.S. Armed Forces in Vietnam.
Yes.
And that was a common argument among particularly the Black Panthers, but even the nonviolent resistance portion of the Black Rights Movement in the 1960s, that Black Americans were being sent to Vietnam to fight for a country that despised them.
And they were
And
usually...
we saw that in Days of Future Past, that
Yes.
there were mutants being sent to Vietnam to fight on behalf of a country that was basically preparing to put them in internment camps.
Right. Now, and I would be out on the stretch too. They were put on the front lines first before anybody else, correct?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
I mean,
And that's something that again is paralleled in real-world military history.
well, that's what I meant in real world. That they were putting those individuals out on the front line first, and kind of weeding everybody out in a way.
Yeah. And they were, and that's something that I think the X-Men are probably one of the most socially conscious comics, from the get-go in that respect. And again, there is a patriotic subtext to that. It's this idea of, the first line, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That is part and parcel of any civil rights movement, be it the African-American civil rights movement, be it the women's movement, be it the gay rights movement, that we are all created equal. That's the basic founding principle of the United States of America. And it's something that comic characters have fought for in a lot of respects. And, I'm just thinking about this now. It, in a way, is one of the defining principles that shows why Lex Luthor despises Superman.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all right. That makes sense.
And what's interesting is, as we've seen more modern versions of Lex Luthor, we see him very much in opposition to Superman based on that principle. He is not created equal.
Oh, definitely not.
There's nobody on the planet who is equal to him. Lex Luthor's story, on the other hand, is a very American success story. He came from nothing, built himself up. Anybody in America could become what Lex Luthor is in a positive way if they have the intelligence, the work ethic, the single-minded drive towards physical and intellectual perfection. You could rise to become Lex Luthor. You could rise to become Batman. You can never, the person born on the streets of Suicide Slum can never become Superman.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. And I could see how that stands, why, actually, just thinking of it, more so why Lex is the way he is.
Exactly. And I wrote about this a little bit in my first Comics and Nationalism piece. An interesting way to look at Superman, especially given when he was created, because being 1939 a product of people who were directly seeing the results of FDR's New Deal in industrial Cleveland, Superman in a lot of ways represents the power of government. That there are problems that are too big for an individual to tackle, and that in those cases, that's when it's the responsibility of government to step in.
But well, wait a minute. Well, Superman's there's nothing too big for Superman.
Exactly. Well, and that was the thing that at the time he was created, that was very much FDR's approach to government.
Right.
That there is no problem that is so big and so complex, and in fact that there are some problems that are so big and so complex that only government can tackle them. Superman, with his unattainable levels of power, is really the only individual who could match that kind of power. And in a lot of those early stories, we saw him even calling out the government, saying, government's going to build housing projects in it, but it's going to build them shoddy. Well, I'm going to tear those all down and make them build new ones.
putting the law in his own hands.
Putting the law in his own hands, but he was still emphasizing that government was trying to solve these huge problems. Batman being the more private sector approach. We're digressing a little bit.
Can we get back on Superman for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now with the newer movies and the representation of him, as an alien, could we say that Superman could represent the melting pot of America? We have a lot of immigrants coming in, or legal and illegal aliens coming in per se. Could he be representative of that as well, that we accept the fact of this coming here, that we are, immigrants made this country?
That's very true, and for a long time that has been one of the common threads in looking at the Superman story, that his is the ultimate immigrant's tale. Came here from somewhere else with nothing but the red, blue, and yellow blankets in his rocket ship, and, you know, contributes immensely to the productivity and the well-being of the nation. There's that great line in Man of Steel when, the general asks him, "How do we know if we can trust you?" And he said, "How do we know you have American interests at heart?" And he says, "General, I grew up in Kansas. That's about as American as you can get."
Yeah, right.
And that's very true, that even though he was born on another planet, and that is one interesting thing that has happened more in the modern comics that they sort of did away with in the comics of the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. I'm going to digress for a little bit and just touch on this point.
Yeah.
In those comics, the post-crisis, pre-New 52 era, Superman was born in America because of the way his origin worked. That
right.
He was growing in that little pod, which was basically his mother, and hatched when the pod landed in Kansas. So in a very real way, he emerged from the womb on American soil. So he was born in America. There was a great story they did in Armageddon 2001.
Do you feel that was
where
done
they
on
take
purpose?
that? I think it was. I think John Byrne very much did that on purpose, because he was born on American soil. He wasn't somebody born elsewhere, a product of a different culture who came to America, which was the pre-crisis Superman. We saw stories in the 1950s of Superman, living out as a toddler on Krypton and playing in the forest and, having Kryptonian culture as a part of his upbringing, as opposed to the entirety of his upbringing being Smallville, Kansas. There was a great story, as I was saying, in Armageddon 2001, where they took it to the Supreme Court when Superman wanted to run for president, and they had to argue that, you're from Krypton, can you run for president? Because you have to be born on American soil to run for president. And they said, well, yeah, the rocket ship, brought him to Earth, but he was still in the womb. He hatched in Kansas. He was born in America, so yes, he can run for president. Well, but what's interesting now, the Man of Steel Superman could not run for president.
No.
Definitely. He was born and delivered on Krypton, and it was baby Superman, not, in vitro Superman that was sent to Earth. So Man of Steel Superman can never run for president.
No.
He's more like an Arnold Schwarzenegger who came here not as an adult, but as, an already born person and took America as his own.
And
America is his adopted country, not his country of birth.
Correct. And I'm sure that would just that would be an interesting comic book story. That would just give everybody.
It really was. You should anybody who hasn't read it really should go back and read it. It was the Action Comics 1991 annual, part of Armageddon 2001, and it's a really neat story. It really is. You've got Lex Luthor throwing up his opposition to Superman based on that. Guy Gardner winds up getting in a fist fight with Superman when he tries to make the Justice League serve not just America, but serve the world as a whole. And Guy Gardner is very nationalistic, America first, and tries to beat up Superman, and it doesn't work very well.
Now, I know we were talking about patriotism in comics, but since we kind of touched on this topic, could we even say, like, superheroes are the minority? I mean, aren't they are standing up for their own beliefs? If there was more superheroes, they wouldn't be the minority. They'd be the majority. I mean, you think there's underlying aspects as the superhero culture as a whole standing up for the minorities?
I think there is. I think that they have always been champions of the oppressed, first and foremost. And it's an ongoing battle in this country to oppress less and less people. Fewer and fewer people, and so we see those themes emerge, and that is one of our most patriotic, most long-running ideas in this country, is that we should always be on the defense against the tyranny of the majority, as the founding fathers called it. That we should never allow the large number of people to control the lives and completely dictate the lives of smaller groups of people.
But isn't that kind of going back? We do.
That happens. As I say, it's an ongoing fight to find the right balance of that between having a democratically elected majority that doesn't trample the rights of the individual. And it's a very, very slippery slope. And we see those conflicts show up time and time again in comics. Civil War being the best example.
Yep.
That the needs of the many on the side of Iron Man, he says that those outweigh the needs of the few or the one. That what individual heroes want out of their lives, their anonymity and their freedom of operation, shouldn't trump the right of the many to feel safe and secure. And Captain America argues that the right of the individual to be free from government intrusion is a core principle. And one of the great paradoxes of America is that they are both right.
I agree, but at the same time, though, as a superhero, isn't always the motivation that one man can make a difference? I mean, Peter Parker, Batman, I can't use Superman as a team. Captain America, isn't that kind of counterproductive for the theme of Tony Stark? I mean, he started out one man can make a difference.
It is. Well, and that's one of the great things about America, and it's one of the things that's consistently driving this country to change, is that it is a country whose ideology is composed of diametrically opposed ideas. That, yes, an individual is capable of immensely amazing things. You look at some of the great figures in American history, we're very individualistic people. Thomas Edison,
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, people that did it on their own and changed the way America functioned. But on the flip side of that coin, you have people who have changed the face of America through larger organizations, through groups of people getting together to solve large problems. You look at FDR's New Deal and the way that completely changed the landscape of American industry. Electrified the entire South, built bridges, built highways, built roads, built everything, power plants. That's not something that any one person would have been able to accomplish on their own.
No, but it benefited so many. I mean, the jobs that it gave were massive.
Exactly. And so neither one of them, Captain America, in saying that the individual is capable, that one man can make a difference, that's not incorrect. We are all more powerful together than we are separately is also correct. As powerful as Spider-Man is, as powerful as Iron Man is, as Captain America is, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, they are all more powerful when they are united, against a common cause.
If they can work together. Now,
if they can agree. And that's the same way that America works.
Right.
We argue over everything in this country. We argue against what we should regulate. We argue against where we should build things. We argue against how much surveillance is okay for the government to be doing in the name of public security. But at the same time, when we all settle on something, say for instance, Nazis are bad and need to be defeated, there is no country in history that has, pardon my French, kicked more ass than America. When we get ourselves together and we can unite behind common cause, there is no country with the ability to wreak more havoc on an international scale than the United States of America. But I think that's because we argue so much. I think one creates the other.
It's like one person is fighting with another person, and it's I hate you, but then you got this other person coming in saying, I don't like Joe, and this guy will be like, you can't say anything about Joe. I can kick his ass, but you can't. Don't talk to him like that. It's like kind of keeping your enemy closer than your friends kind of deal. I have the right to pick on you and go back and forth, but don't let an outsider come in and try to say, hey, that guy's a jerk.
Well, and the way I always looked at it, too, was, you put two guys on the front line, one of whom is a diehard political conservative, the other is a diehard political progressive.
Right.
You put those two guys on the front line together, watching each other's back, and Jerry the liberal is shooting off his sniper rounds, and Joe the conservative is shooting off his sniper rounds. Joe looks at Jerry and says, Jerry, you progressive pansy, you're not going to outshoot me and bring more guys down. And Jerry the liberal looks at Joe and says, Joe, I can outshoot you. It doesn't matter how many times you've gone hunting. But that level of competition between the two of them makes them immensely more powerful as a team than either of them were separately.
Correct. I mean,
it's this idea that we have to defend our beliefs through our actions, even from each other, that pushes us to succeed.
Right. I know. It's like I was saying, we can fight amongst ourselves internally until another country or another group comes in to try to invade us. Then you're like, are you kidding me? There's no way in hell you're going to do that.
Well, one of my favorite moments, and this is sort of a comics thing because it was based on comics. You've seen The Rocketeer, right?
Yep.
There's that great moment where throughout the entire movie, the Rocketeer is trying to fight the mob because the mob, even though they don't know it, is working for a Nazi spy.
Right.
And then at the end, the feds are there, and the mob has the Rocketeer at gunpoint, and the Rocketeer says to him, "How's it feel working for a crowd? Do you know you were working for a Nazi?" And all of a sudden, the mobster turns his gun on the Nazi spy and says, "I may never have made an honest buck in my life, but I'm a red-blooded American.
Yeah. No.
And I don't work for no doggone crowd."
Yeah, exactly. That's how it is. I mean.
And then in the next couple minutes, you see this great shot of, because then all of the Nazi troops show up. And now you got the FBI and the mob standing side by side.
Working together.
Shooting at the Nazis. And, the mob boss and the FBI special agent look at each other for a moment, realize they're standing next to each other, when before they were shooting at each other, and then they just go back to shooting at Nazis.
That's too funny. Now, I mean, I know we're talking, it's a comics podcast, but you bring up a
Well, The
point.
Rocketeer was a comic.
No, I know that.
So.
But you're bringing up a point that, do we need a war to flourish? It seems like we need a common enemy as a country to stop our internal arguing and fodder between each individuals. It seems that the only way the country really flourishes is if we have a strong common enemy, or an enemy.
Some people would say we need a common enemy. I would tweak that a little bit and say we need a common cause.
Okay, I'll agree with that.
Common cause, I mean,
but
because of the way
of
the way we're evolved, we always focus more on a danger, and that's why an enemy is, yes, it's the most effective. If we're looking to identify the most effective way to unite the country, yes, it's got to be an enemy.
Because a common cause, well, that's your cause, not mine.
Right.
And an enemy is an enemy.
That's why it's about making a common cause. I think that's why you see a lot of people, even retired military generals now, trying to talk about the dangers to the security of the United States from things like climate change. It's trying to point at this and saying, this is something, regardless of your political affiliation, that you should be concerned about. If you are, a liberal who just wants it for environmental causes because you love the planet, great. If you're a conservative that just wants it for national defense causes, that climate change poses a clear and present danger to our national security.
Right.
They're trying to bring those two camps together in common cause. You look back at the 1960s, our patriotic common cause, yes, we were opposed to the Russians, but we also wanted to get into space. Yes, because we wanted to beat the Russians there. But JFK managed to make getting into space a common cause. And look at how quickly things moved.
Correct.
Here in America when we had that.
Now that we do have two sides, the individual can make a difference, and obviously large groups can make a difference. It's an ongoing battle. With the louder voices that we have, even the enemy isn't so common anymore either.
No, it's really not.
Trying to find a common enemy, not that we're going out looking for one, but if there's something that happens on our home front, now you have very opinionated individuals, very well-informed individuals. Now it gets harder and harder now to group up and get everybody to decide, well, this is a common enemy. I mean, this is why didn't we kind of fight about this with Vietnam and certain aspects of that, and going to war at any time after that has been an issue to where we've never been 100% as a country to bond together.
Well, that's why I think a lot of political theorists say that the only thing that would ever actually fix that is if we found aggressive aliens.
Oh yeah, we've talked about that.
Yeah,
that's the third part. That's the third party group there.
Well, and I think that there is an effort on the part of certain parties in this country to create those common enemies. You look around and you see a lot of stuff that kind of reminds you of the Cold War with all of this conflict with Russia.
Correct.
And I wonder how, if at all, that will wind up playing out in comics. We see a lot in comics now are representations of the internal conflicts within America. It's hard to represent patriotism in comics in the modern age because there really is no consensus. There is no common cause that we've identified as to what constitutes a patriotic cause.
I was going to say, and isn't there different definitions of being patriotic?
And the other thing that has changed majorly between the birth of comics and today is that the characters have become global brands.
Yes.
So they no longer just represent American ideals and American culture, but they represent a global culture. And if finding a common cause for Americans is difficult, then finding a common cause globally is even more difficult. I think that's why we see a lot of these stories seem to center around external threats that are global threats. You look at the first arc of Jonathan Hickman's Avengers, for instance. Right. It's an attack from space.
Yeah.
You look at the first arc of the Geoff Johns, Jim Lee Justice League. It's an attack from space. We see a lot more of that because that's one of the only areas where you could honestly say, yep, everybody's going to agree that that's a problem.
Right.
There is nobody on Earth who thinks that we should allow Darkseid to take over the planet.
Or another Earth to crash into us.
Exactly. It's our Earth against another Earth. That's something everybody on this Earth can agree that we should deal with. We're getting hit by, evolutionary space goo from Mars. Yes, everybody can agree that that's a problem that we should all deal with. There's nobody who's on the other side of that argument. And I think that there's a consciousness on the part of comic book writers regarding that. I think that they understand that.
Now, do you feel, too, that maybe at this point, because of so many individuals speaking out, having their own mind, and not just a one group, do you feel that we might see we've talked about this before, escapism? Obviously, it's the apocalyptic end is another theory. But do you see that maybe we will get more stories tending away from real life issues and maybe going back to that, not I don't want to say fluff books, but more escapism and not so much maybe individuals' thoughts of political stance?
Well, I think that when you're creating stories, there always has to be a threat, particularly a superhero story. I mean, there always has to be a threat. And I think in a way, those kinds of stories, these massive extraplanetary external threats, they are escapism in a large way. It's saying that this is a problem that is immensely bigger than any of the things that you argue with your family about on Facebook. This is a problem that everybody that you get into arguments with on social media would agree is a problem. In this fantasy world that we're creating, here is a problem that everybody can rally behind, because we don't have that right now in the real world, or at least not one that we've agreed on yet. I mean, you know me personally, I think that, yeah, I mean, especially as a progressive guy and as a defense conservative, I would agree that, yes, climate change is definitely something we should all agree on. But there are people that would disagree with me about that. There is nobody, if another Earth that was going to collide with ours appeared in the sky right now, there is nobody, regardless of their political affiliation, that would say, yeah, we don't need to worry about that. That's a problem for another day.
No, but you'll have people out there going, how are we going to stop that? We're going to kill all the people on that Earth?
There would be that argument.
There's going to be that argument. You know damn well there's going to be that argument.
Nobody would say, we don't need to worry about that.
No, I understand that, but to get it done, that will be the issue, like it was in the book.
Well, but that's the thing too, and that's where I say, that our ability to argue with each other and our drive to argue with each other in this country is part of what makes us great. Because I think that, yes, we would argue over that, until the last possible minute. But the solution that we came to would be a good solution.
Would it?
Because you look back at World War II, there were arguments over how we needed to approach those conflicts. Did we need to focus exclusively on the Pacific? Did we need to just go and knock Japan completely out of the fight and not worry about Germany? Because Germany didn't attack us, Japan attacked us. Or did we need to help Europe take out Germany, because if we focused on Japan and then somehow Europe, all the European powers fell to Germany, then Germany would be able to support Japan and Japan would be able to beat us. That was the argument that was being had in Congress and in the halls of the Department of the Army, or the War Department rather. And eventually we came to a consensus that we needed to fight a war on two fronts. We needed to have a Pacific strategy that consisted largely of delaying things until we could focus on it, and we needed to have a European strategy that said the Nazis are the biggest threat right now in terms of war materiel and overall combat power. We need to take them out first. Then we can take down the Japanese, because they're not going to have any backup.
I still think that even whatever decision we made, or make is not always the right one, though. I mean, let's go back to
and you're right, and you can argue that. Because there are people who still say that Truman shouldn't drop the bomb.
Right. I mean, it's the the many that outweigh the few deal that well, we just saved millions of lives, but how many did you? We're talking about the Avengers book with let's just say the planet crashing into another planet. How many did you destroy to do that? Well, you're here talking about it now. We saved you, but that's not, in some people's minds, that's not the end result. We could have tried to save both worlds at the same time, or we could have tried to been more diplomatic, or so you're always going to get that. Was it?
Oh yeah, and what's great is I think that story that Hickman is doing in a lot of ways parallels the debate that we have about the nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
Should we have dropped the bomb on Japan when we did, or should we have lost hundreds of thousands, if not a million, lives of American soldiers invading Japan by conventional means?
You could even say that dropping the bomb was the easy way. And now I can get flack for that.
Ooh, we might get some flack for that.
What I'm saying,
and what's weird is, I mean, that I'm a very progressive guy, yes, but I'm one of the people that will say, yes, Truman was 100% right in dropping the bomb.
I mean, you can look at it as, instead of trying to work it out diplomatically or doing another effort, we can just drop one bomb and be done with it. And that's not necessarily my stance. That's how I could see some people look. You can look at it that way, but you're like, okay, why didn't they work harder at this or do more stuff with this? Instead, they just dropped one bomb. Now, granted, I know the bomb, and it's bigger than any bomb. Let's put it that way. But I can see that stance. I can see that maybe it wasn't as hard as a decision as you think it was, or we sacrificed too much of ourselves to do that kind of deal.
Well, the way I've always looked at it, and this is way off topic, but I may as well say it, is that Truman looked at the projections that said that it would take us a year or more to conquer Japan by conventional means, and that the estimates in terms of loss of life on both sides exceeded 1.5 million lives.
And I understand that. So
and they killed, I want to say the number was about 100,000 people at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So yes, they killed 100,000 people with 2 bombs. But if you believe those estimates that he saw, that 1.5 million people would have died had we fought the war the other way, I think that he saved lives on both sides.
Okay. No, and like I said, I'm just playing devil's advocate here because I know how some people would think that.
And I'm sure that there's some people out there listening to this that think I'm wrong, that think that we shouldn't have dropped the bomb. I'd be willing to bet you that our veteran listeners, though, probably are with me on that.
No, I'm staying.
Murph, I'm looking at you.
I'm staying clear of this. But no, and I totally understand that, and I get it. If it's coming down stats, and you're pushed to a situation where you have to make the decision, and at that point in time, that was the right decision. Will it be right 6 months down the road? You don't know, but at that point in time, it was the right decision to make. And we see that in the comics. We see that with heroes. I mean, there's been heroes that in the moment make the decision, but the fallout for 8 issues into a story or in a story arc could go even longer than, could go years.
Well, and I would say that in its own way is a very patriotic form of storytelling, because we do that as a nation here in America. We make a hard decision, but then we second guess ourselves for the rest of time. And nobody says that we shouldn't have those debates. No. We say, yeah, we should absolutely have that fight. We should have that debate. We should sit here and we should microanalyze Truman's decisions and Patton's decisions and FDR's decisions and ask ourselves, was it the right decision? Not say, it was the decision we made, it was an American decision, and it was right.
But do we feel, too, because we second guess ourselves, and we do this on a daily basis in our own personal lives, it doesn't have to be on such a gigantic scale, it's because we listen to too many people. Too many people having, and this kind of counterproductive of what we said earlier, is that too many people having a voice sometimes, just to talk.
Yeah, but that's the American way.
Yeah, I get it.
I think that's human nature.
I think that's human nature.
Well, it is human nature, but I mean, very few countries in history until the late 20th, early 21st century have really practiced that.
Right.
It's outside of the United States until recent history, it was very much, these are the people who get to talk, and everybody else needs to listen.
But sometimes can it be counterproductive, Josh?
It can be. I mean, there's the argument to be made that too many voices, cripples the decision making process. But I tend to fall on the side of the more voices you have, the more ideas you have being contributed. It may take you longer to make a decision, but in the end, you're better informed.
It'll make it harder.
It's going to make it harder, yes. And that's why, in times of war, they tend to shrink the circle of people making decisions. Going back to the last time that we really made, unified decisions being World War II, Congress basically said, yes, Mr. President, we will do what you say.
Right.
Whatever you say, we will do that. And it worked because it was the president and the Joint Chiefs that made all the decisions, and Congress, for better or worse, rubber stamped it. They said, this is what the president wants. The president's in charge. We're going to do it. And, it worked out for us. It doesn't always work out for us. We've done that at a couple other times in history, and it didn't work out so great.
And I think that reflects back in the books, whether you're Captain America or Superman, as far as a patriotic person with the red, white, and blue symbol. And it goes back to Batman. It goes back to Green Lantern. And it really, I think we can, as much as I like escapism in my books, I think every book, whether it's a comic book, a novel, if you dig deep enough, you're going to find something in the real world that affected that story, whether we find out that it's something personal from the writer, even if it's not political, there's going to be some some serious details within that book.
I think you're right. I mean, and as we're tying it up here a little bit, I think that the best way to really synthesize everything we've said is that over the course of their life, comics have always represented the way we are making decisions in America at any given time. Whether we're making decisions based on a common enemy that we have and we all get behind that effort, or if we're at a point in our history where we are arguing over everything, that is our version of American patriotism for this given decade or this given year, that's what comics have tended to show. In a very real way, comics represent the cultural zeitgeist of America, if you will, in that the way that we discuss problems is the way that our characters discuss problems. Right. And that's because, by and large, American comics are written by American citizens. And they're having those arguments outside of their offices with other people. Right, and they translate that experience onto the page, and it resonates with people. Because you see Iron Man and Captain America arguing with each other. You've argued over those same problems. And I think that if someday it changes, if, let's just say, for example, if all of a sudden Russia decided they really wanted to go balls to the wall and it was all-out war between the United States and Russia again, I think that you would see superheroes pick up the flag and march off to war, just like they have in the past.
Well, for anything, they're just iconic. Why would you not take your iconic characters that people believed in throughout the years and not do that? I mean, first and foremost, they mean something to people.
Absolutely, and I doubt they'd sell very well in Moscow. But I don't know how well they sell in Moscow now anyway.
Yeah, this is true. And I agree with you. As we wrap this up, I agree. I think as much as I like my escapism, I don't try to delve into it, but you could take any comic book and probably pretty much really pick it apart and see what the serious topic may be. It can be on the writer's personal level, or it could be as big as national or global issues going on, and I agree 110% with that. It's just how it's dealt and how apparent it is in the book, or how in your face it is for each individual title, or how the writer wants to represent that. And we've discussed this too. Your escapism is looking at the real life issues. My escapism isn't so much that. So it covers both fronts. I think.
And see, you and I here, DW, represent a great cross section of that same kind of argument that we're always talking about. You and I fight over things all the time, but when we finally come to a solution, it's usually a pretty good one.
Yeah, it is, and it's a scotch and a smoke.
Yep.
But no, I enjoyed this pod, guys. If you're listening, actually, we have some listeners. Well, look at that. Tweet us, tell us your thoughts. I know that we do have some vets out there and some people in the active military. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And do you like seeing your characters portrayed or getting involved in these type of, I don't want to say military, but government issues? Captain America, obviously, we've seen that in the Civil War, and that's a very serious topic in real life situations. Do you want to see that, or are you just like the escapism and you want Captain America to go to a different planet? Tell us. You can tell us. tweet us if you want at 140 characters at Fanboys Inc. You can tweet me, or you can go over to facebook.com/Fanboys Inc. and make comments when I post this podcast up, or on Facebook.com/Infinite Crossover. Leave your comments there. If you really want to leave nasty 4-letter word comments, Josh has got a few places for you.
Yeah, you can always find me on Twitter. I tend to be on there way too much. You can locate me. I'm at Crusader06. That's ZERO6. You can find me and all of my great colleagues over on cablescrusader.org coming out with the best news and commentary about the independent news. We've got some great new interviews up this week. There's some Tammy Philpott just keeps posting stuff from
what's
Motor
going
City
on?
Comic-Con. She was busy, man.
No
She was
kidding.
really busy. And we've got some great stuff coming from Mike Sains over on Independent Jones. Today being Thursday, Jeff Hayes should have his After Wednesday column up real soon. I know that a lot of people enjoy hearing him on this podcast, so be sure to let us know if you want him back at some point.
Yes, and we'll have some more creator or staff writers on this podcast as well, and on Incast.
Yep, I want to see you guys have Mooka come in and guest over on Incast to talk about all this awesome, ridiculous movie stuff that's going on.
I agree, and I think we're gonna pull Alex Smith might be the actual first one that we're gonna bring on.
Very cool, very cool.
But yeah, Tammy's going.
One of these days I'll stop in and say hi to you guys again.
Yes, definitely. What's going on with Tammy? I mean, Jerry Conway, J.M. DeMatteis. I'm like, it
looks like she had a blast at Motor City, and I know that the creators all really enjoyed these interviews.
Oh yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to more of that from her. I mean, Detroit is her Detroit Motor City is her stomping ground, but that really is the kind of stuff that we're going to be seeing more and more of as our network grows and as we get people out to these cons. So if there are questions that you have for the comics creative community, really the Fanboys Inc. network, along with us at cablescrusader.org, is a great place for you to get answers. I mean, we're gonna put creators on the spot from time to time, and we're gonna ask the good questions, but we also have a lot of fun with them. We give them a chance to talk about the things that they love. So that's terrific.
Once I get back out onto the con scene, actually June 15th will be my next one. I sadly cannot go to the New York Comic Fest, but we are definitely promoting them, and we'll have Dan Greenfield or Robert Bruce on to talk about that con. But June 15th will be our time. We are featured guests at the Albany, New York, 205 Wolf Road, Holiday Inn. Check it out, albanycomicbookshow.com. But we'll start getting the audio interviews that you guys like so much from my last trip out last year to some of the cons. Look for that. Look for Granite State, Rhode Island, New York City Comic-Con. I love the audio interviews. I love the compliment of the written interviews we have. Hopefully one of these days, my goal is, with the cons I'm going to, I better run into a staff member. I mean, Jesus, I'm like, come on. We are everywhere. We are everywhere. And just real quick before we go, I do want to just take a brief second and ask if you're listening to this and if you check out our articles on Fanboys Inc. and on cablescrusader.org, be sure to support our advertisers. We're one of the only sites that actually tries to pay every single contributor. So, I mean, if you see something on one of the sites, whether it's one of the cool ads, like I always get the Not Safe for Wallet that's telling me all the ridiculously awesome nerd stuff I should buy, or even if it's just some cool Facebook game that's advertising, give it a click, check it out, see if it's something you're interested in, because that's how we're able to support our operations and get people, traveling to cons and buy all the awesome books that we want to read and tell you guys about. So be sure to do that, and also please leave us your feedback. If there's something that you want to see on this podcast, if there's something that you want to see on the sites, if you want us to do more or do less of something, please let us know. We are here to be the kind of outlet that you, the fans, want. We are not owned by any of these companies. We don't answer to any comic publisher. We are news for the fans by the fans. So yes, exactly.
Be sure to let us know how to best serve you.
Putting fan back in fanboy. And on that note, Josh, can you please send us off, sir?
Well, we're doing a huge reading initiative coming up here on cablescrusader.org, so I will tell you to take off your headphones. If you've got them, grab your kids and go read something.
Peace.